Let's start.
Dies ist unser erster Workshop. Unser erstes Seminar zu diesem Thema hier in diesem
In our group, and I have to say, and I have to thank Mikael. Mikael, as the chair of the FAM committee, Mikael supported this workshop from the beginning until yet now, and I'm very hopeful that we can have a wonderful discussion today. It can be a beginning of a discussion, and yes, my name is Cornelia Ernst, and I would like make some introductions, and this one I will do it in German. Ja, okay. Sehr verehrte Gäste.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, the fact that we can even carry out this workshop is quite novel, and we rented a fairly small room, the room in which we are today, and we assumed that there wouldn't be that many people present, but we've now realized just how many people have come. And we're very pleased, but I hope that you can also understand that maybe the seating arrangements aren't quite as comfortable as we would have liked. Today's discussion is taking place in a time where both progress is taking place, but also some setbacks, both at the same time. It is a very insecure time. There are many crises rocking the societies to their very cores. And in such times of crises, prejudices and images of enemies always boil up again, and people who don't conform to social norms are under attack. And I think that this is a group that is definitely affected by this, because they do not fit into the paternalistic view of the world or the traditional view of marriage. And we don't even need to look as far as Iran and be dismayed at the fact that people are being executed, killed and persecuted for their sexual orientation. Even in the rest of the world, in the vast majority of countries, people are being discriminated against. Homophobia is still mainstream in many EU countries, even though there is an anti-discrimination directive within the European Union to protect such people. In France, hundreds of thousands of people protested against gay marriage, which was incredible for me. In the Baltic states and in Russia, there are laws and practices that target homosexuals. In Hungary, right-wing, brutal people are attacking CSD demonstrations, and again, homophobia is present in our everyday life. In such times of conflict, usually gays, we have to say it, gays are most affected by such violent attacks, and women are often not perceived, they are often not seen, they're often not there. It often appears that there's no such thing as lesbian women because they're so invisible. And some people then even say that it's just something that the woman needs is just a man. It's a crisis of identity, or she's not a real woman. These are arguments that we hear again and again. The acceptancy of lesbian forms of life seem to be almost less than the acceptance for the homosexuality of men. And that is why today we need to speak about women. At the same time, there is progress. Societies change, even in Russia, even in other countries. Things are moving, and it's not always negative. There are other positive signs. Many organizations speak out for differences and for the same rights of homosexual people in the public sphere. In my home country, there was a very long process of conflict and of dealing with the topic, and there are many, many people who do find homosexuality to be completely normal by now. It has become completely normal. If we ignore all the hardliners whom we won't be able to convert anyway, there is more understanding for the issue in Germany. And about 14 years ago, I met my wife, and it was at about the same time that I became head of the biggest group of the left-wing party in Germany, and we thought about how to celebrate this. We celebrated a huge party. We invited lots of people. It was sort of a flat-warming party for our new flat and for everything that was happening, and hundreds of people came, including top people from politics and from my political group, and we had very clearly established this is the way it is. And everyone accepted it, and there was no backstabbing afterwards. But, and I have to highlight this, we did not have to live in fear. We did not have to live in fear within our society. We did not have to be afraid of coming out and displaying our relationship in public, because many things had changed. The most important thing for us was that our families did not turn their backs on us. Quite the opposite occurred. And my father, who is now 80 years old, was very proud to introduce my wife to the rest of our family. It was fantastic. It was truly wonderful. And when we thought about moving in together later, sharing a flat, the landlord found it very hard to accept that we were both the main renters, and my father played a large role in making the landlord accept this. And what was important was that we were partners. My wife and I were partners, and people accepted that. And then the different ways of life then moved forward, and it all began with having the same rights of other people. In the region in which I live in Germany, in eastern Germany, in Saxony, the then conservative government banned homosexual marriages in the public area. And we're a large region, about 4 million people, and there was only one authority, one public authority to which we could go to sign up for partnership, and it was actually the authority that was responsible for foreign affairs and for dealing with foreigners. And of course it was very clear that many couples did not want to go and sign the piece of paper in this context, and which is why we didn't do it either at the time. And at the moment, homosexual marriage is still only possible within a registered partnership, which is not the same as marriage. And in 2009, there was a new government in my region, and that government then insisted on us being able to marry in the town hall just the same as other couples. And when this was published in the media, and we married and we published our marriage in the newspaper, we received many gifts, a lot of kitsch, all the wedding kitsch, and it went on for months, about 6 months. For 6 months, people were still congratulating me and were still sending us gifts, people whom I hadn't even thought would be so accepting. It was like winning the Nobel Prize, and in a way it was like winning the Nobel Prize, because it was a form of being valued and of being accepted, and that was more important than anything else. Nowadays, there is still no equality between lifelong partnership and marriage in Germany, so there's still a lot to do, just as in other countries. And the road towards true equality is such a long road, and in some countries the road has even become longer. We all know the problems of homophobia, and homophobia seems to be on the rise, which does scare me. But we have to be proactive in fighting against these prejudices, and that is what we want to do with this workshop today, by shining the lights on topics, discussing topics, and trying to achieve more steps along the road to equality. It's not about being uniform, it's about being diverse. Diversity is a gift of human life, a gift that we all need to accept, and I think that we can contribute to this today. Thank you very much.
Microphone.
Okay. It's okay. Yeah, thank you. Now I have the great honor to lead this discussion, and I will do it. And yes, first I would like give you the floor, Mikael, and you can and should say something for your introduction. And please.
Thank you so much. And I first would like to say that I'm here both as an MEP from the GUE-NGL, of course, but I'm also here as the chair of the Committee for Women's Rights and Gender Equality. And I'm very pleased that GUE-NGL organized this event, and I'm very happy and I'm also very glad that you, Cornelia, took this initiative to have this very important workshop. So I'm very glad of that, really. And the reason why is because lesbian rights are about fundamental rights for LGBT persons, and it's about to live free from discrimination, violence and injustice that are directed against them because of the sexual orientation or sexual identity. But rights to lesbians in Europe is also advancing women's rights and gender equality in Europe, to live in societies where all women can express their sexuality, have equal opportunities to work and education, and also access to basic things like health care, housing and pension rights. And in this sense, lesbians accumulate two dimensions of discrimination, or it could be even three if they are belonging to a minority. And I think one can safely say that LGBT movements does not enough take into account a feminist perspective or a gender equality perspective. Lesbians remain still largely invisible in that sense. And I think also it's safe to say that lesbians are not taken enough into account in the mainstream work for women's rights. So the work here in the European Parliament is not an exception in this, of course. The FAM committee has not done any specific report on the situation of lesbians in Europe. And to my knowledge, the LGBT intergroup has not organized such an event like this and on focus on the rights of lesbians. However, the FAM committee has done some works on the issue connected to lesbian rights, and mostly by integrated reference to rights of lesbians in other reports. And it can be in reports as employment or violence against women, or issues are based on non-discrimination. There are two specific occasions where the FAM committee have raised the issue more clearly when it comes to rights for lesbians. And the first is a resolution that was adopted in the spring 2012, and it was violence against lesbian women and LGBT rights in Africa. And as you hear by the name, it was focused on the lesbian outside European Union. And it's in European Union, it's always very easy to focus on things that are not here. It's much easier to say that, they should do that, and they should do that. But okay, the good thing that these resolutions link the women's rights agenda and the rights of lesbians together, and said very clearly that lesbians are subject to violence, both on basis of being a woman, but also on the basis of sexual orientation. So that was the good thing, at least. The second thing that are connecting to lesbian rights is the report that we have been working very hard now on, and we voted today on, again, in the FAM committee. And that's the report of sexual and reproductive health and rights, the Estrella reports. And the draft text has a very, very strong wording in favor of LGBT people and lesbians. And in its previously draft, it has who was rejected by the plenary and sent back to the committee. It has a paragraph that says that calling for member states to make assisted fertility treatments available for lesbians and single women. I think that was a very, very good paragraph, and we were also part of that to create that paragraph. Unfortunately, today that paragraph was voted out. But in one perspective, I'm not surprised about that, because we are up against very powerful conservative players when it comes to this in this area. They have so far blocked the vote in plenary, but they couldn't block it today because it was passed, but only by 19 to 15 in the votes. So we now have to really work hard if this report is going to be adopted. But it still have good things in it connecting to the issue that we're talking about today, because it protects all women's right to bodily integrity and to sexual freedom and to decide freely over their bodies. It's obviously that we have people in this house that are very much against women's rights, and in particular women's sexual and reproductive rights. And we have members of this house that are very homophobic, as you mentioned, definitely. Luckily so far they haven't not been in the majority when we vote, but the outcome of this sexual and reproductive health and rights report will now show if we have really achieved the progress that and we can win this battle. The reason why it was referred back from the beginning might not have been only political, it could have been other issue, but we really hope it's going to be adopted in the plenary now. So once again, I'm very happy that we organized this workshop, and we will now hear from experts and activists about the situation and what needs to be done. I know that I and many other politicians can do much, much more in this area. But I also know that we cannot do anything without the support of NGOs and activists outside the Parliament. If all of you here are not active, not taking part of this, that will make it much more difficult for us as a politician to fight this fight these stereotypes and things. So I'm very glad that we are so many people in this room. So thanks very much for being here, and I hope that we can contribute to all of us, and also that we can cooperate in the future on this area. So thank you very much, and I give the floor back to Cornelia.
Thank you, Mikael. I think we are in a common fight for these rights, and I hope that in the next plenary we will decide about the Estrella report positive. And yes, it's a very, very big sign for the society in the EU, and I hope that we will be successful. Yes, thank you. And now I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Abbing. Mr. Abbing, he comes from the Fundamental Rights Agency, and yes, I think you have the overview, and please, I give you the floor. Okay.
Maybe we could start with the clip.
Okay.
So before I will present to you the dry figures, which will nevertheless be telling enough, we thought it was important to first hear the faces and voices of victims of hate crime. Do we have?
Yeah.
Do we have?
I think we have.
Yeah.
I hope we have. That's what the technician said.
Out of hospital, I was very aware that I was a victim of hate crime. Because of the things that were said during the attack, and obviously how I was treated after the attack. I didn't know the full extent of, the advice or support that I could get. The police were very vague and very quick to kind of move on in the process.
it's really existential fear, you know, fear of pogroms, fear of their children in town, if they will come back home, you know, safe.
In Europe, in a European country, when I came, it was, I should say that it is two kind of hate crimes I have experienced. It is, one is governmental hate crimes, I should say it's police violence, and the second is the hate crimes by far-right groups and extremists.
So when I first saw my face on a neo-Nazi website, I was shocked, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was not serious. I didn't think that what was the reason for me to appear. And then more and more articles came, and it became more serious.
I don't know. There's just something changed. I felt vulnerable. Something changed inside me. My self-esteem as a woman changed, and my vulnerability as a woman changed. And I've always been a very strong person. And yeah, that it changed from that moment onwards.
My parents were really scared, and it ended up me essentially leaving the country.
That the police were telling me that the two guards, I don't say that all the police, of course, that the two guards that they were in front of the police station, they told me that if you make a complaint, we will put you 3 nights. It is the words that they told me, that we will put you in a detention center. So it was shocking for me, really.
These institutions are with people who are succumbing to a kind of irrationality and a desire to find a scapegoat for their problems. And the Roma have been, for some reason, chosen to be the scapegoat.
I think anybody can make a difference, and politicians are in the position to make a difference. But it seems like it's people like me and other people that are speaking for us that are trying to get the politicians to see what is actually going on out there.
I think Europe's politicians should really say now, stop. We have to say values. We shouldn't divide people. Let's not scapegoat or add oil to the fire and instill more hatred so that you get a few more votes.
In my opinion, as my experience from 2002 till now, that it is getting worse. That if the politicians, if the society, if the communities, they don't take steps against these hate crimes, I think it gets worse and worse.
I want politicians and policymakers to bring the perpetrators to justice and to make examples of you cannot just write anything with a fake name online and get away with it.
I'd like the politicians and policymakers to recognise that this does happen and that there isn't a great support network out there for people that have gone through what I have been through.
Okay, the reason why we show this, as we plan to do as well, I'm happy the technique is much better here, because parallel to this meeting, there's a meeting on anti-Semitism. So just a couple of rooms away from this room, where a colleague of mine has presented a very recent survey on anti-Semitism. And we were planning to show exactly the same clip, because we find it important that in various audiences, the message is well understood that we have regrettably more victims of hate crime in Europe, and that this is a growing phenomenon. And the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, which I represent here today, very much hopes that members of European Parliament, Commission representatives, the Council of Ministers also will duly take this into consideration when next year they have to think and devise a new program for the next 5 years in the area of freedom, security and justice, and that this will become an issue which really deserves the attention, gets the attention it very much deserves, because those were 4 victims of hate crime. Of course, we focus now on Zen, a British woman who was very clearly a victim of homophobia. But we see, as I said before, more victims of more hate crimes. It's very important that politicians acknowledge this and address the issue as hate crime in its comprehensiveness. Let me now start with presenting to you the findings of the biggest ever LGBT survey undertaken. And many of you, I'm sure, will have already heard of it or maybe have seen the results. So let's go to the first slide. So it was a survey which we have undertaken on the request of Commissioner responsible for fundamental rights, Vice President Viviane Reding. It was informed by our previous research in the area in relation to LGBT persons. We used experience gained from previous large-scale surveys, and the objective was to obtain reliable and, very important, comprehensive and comparable data on the human rights situations of LGBT people aged 18 and above in the EU. It included already Croatia, even though the survey, as we will see from the next slide, was undertaken before they joined the EU. So an unprecedented big number of 93,079 people who were self-declared homosexuals or transgender filled in an internet questionnaire, and they sent that to us. As I said, the whole member states were covered. It was available in the languages you see there, and it was open for a number of months in the year of 2012. Yeah. So this is the breakdown of people who participated in the survey. As you see, there were nearly 15,000 lesbians who took part, constituting 16% of the total of that 92,000. You see the breakdown there as well. You also see the breakdown per country. So we did get respondents from all 28 countries. We also got it from, you could say, a statistical point of view, enough per member state. If you see, let's say, only 357 for Malta, of course, it is justified, let's say, seeing the small size of Malta. And as you can see, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom were the countries where most people participated. We covered 4 areas in the survey, namely the areas which we all have to deal with in everyday life: employment, education, access to healthcare and social services, and finally hate crime, of which I just show you 4 examples of what hate crime can be, and daily life. Starting with discrimination in employment, you see on the right side in sort of reddish color the breakdown again. Lesbian women, 21%, felt discriminated against when looking for a job and work in the last 12 months preceding the filling in of the questionnaire. Average was 20%, and let's say most discriminated in their views were transgender people. Discrimination outside employment. Here we see quite a high number for the answers given by lesbian participants to the survey, namely 39% felt discriminated outside employment. It's quite clearly higher than gay and bisexual men. We, of course, deal not only with data, but we deal with real life situations. That's why we also have included in our survey quite a number of quotes. We also have seen that well picked up by the media coverage when we presented the survey on the 17th of May 2013. At the end, and after all, it is the human interest stories which, of course, are most appealing. Discrimination in education. Please take a look at the figures. Here you have a difference between lesbian women and gay men in terms of having experienced, heard or seen negative comments or conduct at school because of being LGBT. And this is what the results indicate. On the whole survey really highlighted it as a very big problem. About 80% of all respondents really felt that school time for them was highly problematic. Some said life at school for us was hell, because they couldn't disclose themselves, or they were bullied or punished or whatever. It was a very clear concern, and there was no good or bad country in this matter. All across the 28 member states, it more or less gave the same pattern. And this is the exact slide I have just been referring to. 67% LGBT average. Moving to the healthcare and social services. Discriminated against by healthcare or social service in the past year. Here you see the figures for lesbian women, 13%. In terms of healthcare, social service, 9%. Again, clearly higher than for gay men and bisexual men. Again, quotes, particular in regard to the experience of quite a few lesbian respondents to our survey in their access and their treatment with medical doctors. Humiliating up until bullying comments from the doctors concerned. What we did is at the end of the questionnaire, so there were many questions which people had to fill in, and at the very end people could fill in comments in a sort of a free text box. And what we saw is particular from the lesbian respondents, quite a few of the comments related to what they clearly felt as mistreatment by medical services. Yeah. Again, here you see it spelled out. What is meant with why did they feel mistreated? From inappropriate curiosity to having to change general petition due to negative reaction, difficulty in gaining access, or very disturbing, of course, foregoing, so skipping a possibly important medical treatment for fear of discrimination or intolerant reactions. I think that's an extremely disturbing figure. Yeah. I hope people can read it at the back. If not, I am very happy to read it out. But I think so far you are able to read it, aren't you? Yeah. Again, the negative experience sometimes or often in terms of negative reactions for being too masculine, for gay men too feminine. As you see, there is an enormous difference between men being receive negative reactions for being considered to be too feminine, as opposed to bisexual women or lesbians being considered to be too masculine. Yeah. This is a data which always for me is very disturbing, I have to say. I'm myself from the Netherlands, where on the whole it is considered to be a relatively good situation for homosexuals. However, also in my own home country, 65% of people were afraid of holding hands with their partners in public, including in a very tolerant city such as Amsterdam. As you can see, it seems to be less a problem perceived by lesbian women. Maybe it is generally considered to be more acceptable if women hold hands together. Here, clearly, for men, it is a bigger problem. These are what we call the daily life situation. This is maybe what at the end it's also all about, that you do not have the possibility to be yourself and to hold hands with the one who you love, as we all want to do. This is about violence, the prevalence of violence in the last 5 years. So that's the blue bar, and the red one is over the last year. And here you see that 23% of the lesbian respondents had experienced one or more incidents of violence over the last 5 years, and 9% in the last year. So all, of course, completely unacceptable high figures, because here we're talking about real violence. And just to say that the Zen, the victim of homophobia who you saw in the clip, she also showed to us a picture how she looked like after she was being molested by people in London, and that is extremely disturbing to see. Here what we have noted is that violent attacks against women are much more likely to have been a sexual attack as opposed to gay men who are beaten up. And for women, for lesbians, it is seemed to be mostly a sexual attack. Yeah. Here you see the incidence of hate-motivated attack of a sexual nature as a percentage of the total hate-motivated violence. Again, you see for yourself the differences in the groups we have investigated upon. Yeah. Moving to what we think should be the way forward, which is one very thing which we know a good majority, I think, in the European Parliament is in principle supporting, namely the so-called horizontal directive, which has been put forward by the European Commission, I think, in 2008. So it's still a proposal on the table. And what it aims to do is to extend EU-wide prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation across all EU member states, very much beyond the field of employment and occupation. So to also include the grounds of sexual orientation as is proposed by the Commission in this horizontal directive, which is still stalled. We also very much feel that an EU strategy for equality between women and men should be enhanced to include programs to combat stereotypes and discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as homophobia and transphobia. This is, of course, a lot of awareness raising needed. Yeah. In terms of our recommendations in regard to the specific issue of health, we very much feel that EU member states should ensure that adequate training and awareness raising is offered to healthcare providers. There's a lot of ignorance, and awareness raising, adequate training is absolutely needed. Also, in national health plans, we feel that the member states should include a section on LGBT healthcare clients and ensure that surveys, as I said, training curricula, health policies take into account LGBT persons' specific needs. Now, the survey has been compiled into this summary report. There also will be a full results report, which will be 300-400 pages. Also to indicate to more skeptical people, of which I'm sure none of you are present today, that it was all a cock-up by FRA and that there were never 93,000 respondents and that this was all made up. So we have a huge report which will demonstrate really the way we work. This is at a glance, really an executive summary, which we hope is useful for you. What I also would highly recommend you to do is to take a look at what we call the data visualization tool. So on our website you will hopefully relatively quickly find it. It was the survey where we experimented for the first time with having this data visualization tool. What is so interesting is you can then for yourself make, let's say, your own analysis. If you don't want to have the overall data for the 5 groups only for lesbians, you can do it. You can see what the lesbian responses were from lesbians from Belgium vis-à-vis the Netherlands, from Portugal vis-à-vis the EU average. You can also filter it in age groups, in social status group, income groups, and if somebody comes from a city or from the countryside. So you can really do your own analysis, and that may inform your political, your activist, or otherwise work. And I think then the last 2 slides, or the last slide, is what we, coming to your theater, if I might put it like this, relatively soon, are 3 things. 2 are mentioned here, and the 3rd one I will tell you orally, also because of Chairman Gustafsson's remark earlier. The first one is we're doing now qualitative research into the drivers and obstacles for setting up LGBT policies with a quite interesting group of people, professionals, namely public officials, police officers, health workers, and teachers. So how do police officers deal with LGBT situation, the LGBT policies? There also will be taken from the data of this report a focus report on the situation of transgender persons who, let's say, come from this report as the group who experiences the biggest problems. What I haven't shown you yet is something which I would like to already tell you, which is that early March we will publish a big survey again on violence against women. It will not be specifically on violence against lesbians, but it will include that as well. Again, the first ever comparative report undertaken in the 28 member states. 42,000 interviews were held on a door-to-door situation. So this time not internet questionnaire, but really door-to-door in the countries where we are looking at violence in all its dimensions, including something which seems to be regrettably now fashionable as well, which is cyber stalking. I will stop here, and we will come to the Parliament in March with this report as well. And I'm, of course, after the other presentation, I'm very happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting introduction, and I think we will wait for this report, and it can be very helpful for us for the discussion and the work in our group and in the Parliament. Yes. Before we have a short possibility for questions and discussion, we hear two other colleagues. First is Sanja Juras. I hope it was right. Juras, okay. She comes from the lesbian group Kontra in Croatia, and the other points will you introduce for your person. And the second, before our short break, is Sabrine Al-Rassas. Perfect. Al-Rassas. Yes, okay, she comes from France, and then we make a short discussion break, and after them we will hear something from these four countries. Okay, please start.
So, hi, I'm Sanja Juras, and I actually come from ILGA Europe. ILGA Europe is a membership-based organization, so I do come from lesbian group Kontra from Croatia, and I have to say I'm really happy to be here today and to have this discussion on lesbian-specific issues at the European Parliament. I think this is a really important point to make, sort of. And I come from a feminist organization, and I'm also a member of the Women's Network of Croatia, so I understand how important it is to have cooperation between women's organizations and also with gay men and LGBT organizations at national level as well as at the European level. So first, if we can start with the presentation. I have to say, at this point in my country, we are deciding on a referendum whether to introduce definition of marriage as only between a man and a woman into the constitution. So I had a little bit difficulties of coming here and being here. I'm really happy to be here, but part of the presentation will come from my head, and part will be at the PowerPoint because of the lack of time to prepare, actually. So ILGA Europe is the European region of international lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex association, and we work for equality and human rights of LGBTI people at the European level. ILGA Europe is an international non-governmental umbrella organization, and we have 408 members from 45 of the 48 countries in Europe. ILGA Europe advocates for human rights and equality of LGBTI people at the European level before the organizations such as the European Union, Council of Europe, and the OSCE. We work on strengthening the European LGBTI movement by providing trainings and support to member organizations and other LGBTI groups on lobbying, advocacy, fundraising, litigation, organizational development, and communications. My organization is one of the organizations that have greatly benefited from this activity. ILGA Europe is also a member of Social Platform, and since 1997 we enjoy participative status at the Council of Europe. And also consultative status at ECOSOC. So to start with the presentation, first of all, we were asked to present a little bit on violence against lesbians and the status of in Europe. So lesbians experience gender-based violence both on account of the gender and because of the way our sexual orientation challenges patriarchal concepts of gender and gender roles. So this double exposure causes to causes of gender-based violence puts lesbians at particular risk. A recent survey by London's Metropolitan Police of more than 1,100 LGBT women found that approximately twice as many had experienced violence or abuse on account of sexual orientation or gender identity as on all other grounds, despite the fact that nearly half of the respondents changed their behavior or appearance to avoid homophobic or transphobic abuse. The double exposure also means that violence against lesbians can only be addressed effectively by international instruments if part played by homophobia and transphobia is acknowledged and specific countermeasures identified. So if we can skip the two. So violence against lesbians we can divide into categories, I would say. And first of all, violence experienced on account of sexual orientation. So domestic violence, including forced marriage, deprivation of liberty, sexual violence and harassment. Also violence occurring in general community, including physical violence, sexual violence, verbal abuse, harassment, threats, intimidation. And on the other hand, same-sex intimate partner violence, which also occurs but is not spoken enough about in many countries. So we can see through individual cases the way in which a person may experience the violence more or less concurrently, both in family, community, and on the other hand, at the hands of state officials or services, and that greatly increases vulnerability. So these are some of the examples. For example, a case from Armenia. I don't know whether to read it or you can see it. We had case of family violence and then police harassment and a refusal to provide health care, all happening at the same case. So next one. So the case from Split from 2012, this is the one that I will actually tell for myself because it's the case that I have been working on. It was attack on 6 lesbians in Split at beach at the city center. It happened very closely after the second Split Pride. And if you know, first Split Pride went in violence, and then the second one went peacefully because of the huge number of state officials attending it. But of course, before and after each public event, we have increase of violence in the community because more visibility brings more violence to lesbians as well as to gay men. So first of all, they were attacked by a group of men. They insulted them on the basis of their sexual orientation, and they have beaten them up. And the police, when they came, they were extremely rude to women, and they wouldn't take complaints until we reacted as an NGO. And then the case later on was handled as a street fight. actually. And the charges were at the end dismissed. It was wrongly qualified, and the charges were dismissed because it was stated by the public prosecutor's office that, and later on the court, that they participated in fight. So let's go on. And then with domestic violence, with social attitudes through much of Europe remaining hostile to LGBT people, many people fear extreme reactions if they disclose sexual orientation to family members. So this is an example from Albania. LGBT persons, so this is from the report, fear that admitting their sexual orientation to their families may lead to extreme measures, psychological and physical violence, severe control of their lives. There have been cases of LGBT persons forced by their family to get married without their consent, or even cases of persons kicked out of the house and disinherited. 91% of survey respondents were found to conceal their sexual orientation from family members. And then in Turkey, we have specific references to lesbian and bisexual women in the report. So Human Rights Watch interviewed 24 lesbian or bisexual women and girls in 2003 and 2007. The most overwhelming factor that they cited to Human Rights Watch is the subjection of women and their sexuality to the family and its values, including honor or custom, as women and girls whose sexualities move beyond the norms and expectations of heterosexuality. Lesbians and bisexual women and girls feel these pressures in especially acute ways and feel and fear the steady possibility of family violence. And okay, and these are some of the cases that were quoted in this report. So I'm not planning to say anything ever. This is something that can result in killings in my family. You can see a woman saying, my dad says I can forgive if my children are prostitutes, thieves, but I cannot forgive one thing, being homosexual. This is from a woman 26 years old from Turkey. So there is another case. You can read it. Okay. Okay. Sorry because of that. Yeah, so in many reports, and I know this from personal experience as well, gender nonconformity can be, at most cases, base for violence against lesbians. So in many reports it is mentioned that women who look more butch are more targeted than the ones that are not. So these are some of the examples as well for this specific type. So they made me marry because they caught me with my girlfriend having sex when they found out that. Sorry, what happened?
I don't know, I go forward.
Something happened, yes. Oh yes, this is, yes. So, and these are the examples, I'm sorry. Yes, so you can see a testimony of one of the women from the UK. And she is stating that her partner has been more often targeted because she is not stereotypically feminine. Okay. And then, as also the colleague from FRA mentioned, sexual assault is something also that needs to be mentioned as a form of violence, especially against lesbians. And one of the UK report commented, in many instances the sexual violence seems to have been perpetrated as a means of controlling, pushing and converting young lesbian and bisexual women. And then we have a quote from a report from Poland, personal testimony of a woman who has been sexually attacked. Okay. Okay. Don't need to go. And then the effects on victims of violence. So just under 1/3 of respondents to the London police report felt that the incidents had a long-term impact upon them, and stated that this resulted in an increase in them of feeling unsafe, isolated, trapped, and in hiding their sexual orientation. Almost half of respondents did not feel safe when using public transport. So a little bit about legal protections, but I will not go much into that. So at the EU, at the moment, EU law protects people against discrimination based on sexual orientation, as well as age, disability, religion, and belief in the area of employment. And this is through Employment Framework Directive from 2000. Number 78. So in practice, that means that you are legally protected against the across the EU, for example, for being refused a job or fired because of your sexual orientation, or being harassed by colleagues at work because you're gay or lesbian. And in practice, I can tell you that many of the countries, especially in Western Balkans, will introduce only what is in the EU directive and nothing more or nothing less. Some of them not even that, like Macedonia. So it is really important what is in the EU directives, and that reflects much on our lives in practice. So this is why we are advocating for horizontal directive that was already mentioned. So at the same time, European legislation does not protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, and belief in other areas of life, such as access to goods and services, including housing, social protection and social advantages, education, and healthcare. In practice, this means that not everyone in EU is protected against homophobic bullying in school, refusal of medical services and treatment to openly LGBT people, refusal to give a double room in a hotel for same-sex couple, refused access to social security schemes such as survivors' pensions and financial assistance to careers. On the other hand, the grounds of race and gender do enjoy stronger protection in the European Union. Race Equality Directive protects against discrimination based on race and ethnic origins in all areas of life. And sex discrimination is prohibited by EU law in employment, in access to goods and services. So that basically means that in EU we have hierarchy of human rights, and this is something that we want to have eliminated. So one good example, for example, of specific mentioning of LGBT women in the international documents is Convention of Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which includes specific protections for lesbians, bisexual, and transgender women. And this is something that ILGA Europe has worked on a lot, and we had cooperation with European Women's Lobby on that issue. And on that hand, I would now like to just have a few comments in regards to, okay. Okay, just to say, I believe it is extremely important that we cooperate with feminist organizations, with women's organizations at international level, that we address these issues and the problems of lesbians specifically while advocating for international documents, but also while working with our members and working with other organizations. We, as ILGA Europe, have Women's Caucus at our annual conferences where we address women-specific issues. We have workshops that target specifically lesbian issues where we discuss strategically women-specific issues. On the other hand, to the outside, we cooperate with women's organizations, and while advocating for international documents, we ask for specific mention of LGBT issues in documents.
Round is, I take Sabrine.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Ms. Ernst and Malin, for inviting us, for coordinating also this meeting. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Djiboutian. I came from France, but I'm Djiboutian. I exiled for political reason to France. Djibouti is in the east of Africa. I define myself as a political lesbian or radical feminist, if you want. This is very important. I mean, just to precise that I co-founded this group, which is called Lesbians of Color, and the group was created in 2009 by an black African-American French mixed, and an Indian who is exiled to France, and by myself as Djiboutian exiled also. So the group was created in 2009, as I said, and it became an official association last July 2013. It is an autonomous group, non-mixed, with a radical approach made up of French lesbians of immigrant origin, of exiled lesbians, refugees lesbians, lesbians who share migration or exile stories linked to colonialism, slavery, or institutional racism, lesbians who have in common experience of being made invisible in feminist lesbian or LGBT circles in general. So, consequently, LUX is not part of any feminist or lesbian collective, and certainly not of any mainstream LGBT organization in France. Two main ideas led to the creation of our group: a contradictory experience, a sort of in-out, and a wish to take action and fight in accordance with our real-life experiences, with making our actions and our analysis visible in order to fight in an interlinked way against sexism, racism, lesbophobia, and class. On this basis, it became urgent for us to create our own proper space for resistance with our own modes of expressions. The concepts of space and expressions are at the heart of our activism. A space which is safe, secure, serene, non-mixed, and of course free from any relationship of domination or oppression, in order to make visible in concrete terms our political, theoretical, artistic, activist experience. So I'm going to explain which means, contradictory, a sort of inclusion and exclusion. As lesbian and as feminist, we tend to prefer feminist and LGBT spaces with which we have something in common and with which we can identify ourselves, or where we feel safe, thinking that these spaces should be more open and therefore free from oppression of any type. However, we experience racism on the inside as well as racism which exists outside, and the shift to the right of feminist and LGBT. So, in conclusion, we are present, but we are not seen, and we are not, visible. Besides, there is an hierarchical approach, a sort of hierarchy approach to the fight within the LGBT and the Feminist Lesbian Association, the fight against homophobia, lesbophobia, which is very important, of course. It's very fundamental, of course, because as a lesbian, we are fighting against discrimination based on the sexual orientation. But we thought that did not satisfy us, because this approach gives secondary importance to, or even hides, the question of color and the factors underlying it, namely social relations of race and class, reflecting society in general, while we are experiencing these interlinked oppressions. The problem was that these associations, group, or movement have never questioned these relations and their effect, or had only questioned them very little. They have not taken into account the feminist and lesbian diversity, as French feminists were focusing on gender as the only factor of women's oppression. It's why I have many questions concerning your survey. To conclude, this contradictory experience of inclusion and exclusion reinforces a process of invisibilization of lesbian of color voices and confirms that feminist and LGBT spaces are not above reproducing oppressive patterns. But this means also that it's very, possible and necessary to join why I'm here, and thank you on behalf of my groups. Fantastic. To join other lesbians, other white feminists, or other structures, or other workshops within the scope of temporary strategic alliances in order to achieve same objectives. Why temporarily? Because we need to control all aspects of our actions and our ways of organizing ourselves, which is essential to our objective of being autonomous, of having visibility. So we refuse any attempt at amalgamation or assimilation with any other group, as this could depoliticize our analysis, our experiences, expressions, and our activism. So maybe I can conclude just the activities we achieve within the LUX group. For instance, we initiate a whole range of practices or actions. Also, we develop a solidarity with all women and lesbians in the world. And we participate also within solidarity actions. For instance, the next 29 November, we host an event, an artistic and activist event with South African lesbian who are victims of rape and corrective rape. We also organize non-mixed feminist and lesbian march. The non-mixity is very fundamental for our vision as radical and as feminist. And of course, we help the political asylum. The lesbian political asylum seeker. So many other activities, but this is just a bit. But we have such thing to say about this. Also, we release many articles. It's very important, to write our analysis. For us, it's to grant our political issue and political vision. And thank you very much.
Oh yes, very interesting, your initiatives and your organization, and I think it's very important to carry out activities and initiatives, not only speak about the things, do something in the publicity, and the connection between feminism and LGBT, I think, yes, it's a very interesting thing, and we should speak about that, but not only that. Now, we have, 50 minutes for a short discussion round where we can ask some questions or make comments. Yes, please. Yes.
My name is Alfie Azvaya. I work in the European Parliament. I have one question and one comment. The question is one that our community, the LGBTI community, is afraid to speak about, and that is the internal discrimination between lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Too often within the community I hear lesbian bashing amongst gay people, as well as bashing of HIV-positive men or gay men who belong to ethnic minorities, and that can lead to a host of other problems. My question is, what are we doing about this in particular, and how can we have a clear and coherent message when fighting for our rights outside of the community if, as a community, we're divided amongst ourselves? And the comment, and this is to everyone here, I guess, and working in the European Parliament, I want to elaborate further on Mikael's point. We've seen what happened in plenary with the Estrella report when it was being discussed in plenary and being sent back to the FEM committee. We've seen the anti-discrimination directive stalled at the council. However, in both cases, we see the important role the Parliament plays in first bringing a report like the Estrella report, but also pressuring the council to actually pass the anti-discrimination directive. I say to everyone here, and I say it loudly, I say, come May 2014, make sure you vote, because as it stands, and as the predictions stand, we will end up having the most right-wing, homophobic, and xenophobic parliament. Come May 2014, we're fighting for our rights, and if we don't vote, unfortunately, we're going to have a parliament that won't be able to defend us.
I think we should collect some questions and comments. Yes.
Hello, my name is Patricia Kurzi from International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender Association. I have a question for the representative from the Free Agency related to the survey. You've been mentioning that 16% of respondents were lesbians out of the number of people surveyed. I wanted to ask whether a specific action was taken to make sure that this minority, invisible minority within a minority, was given the opportunity to reply in a broader way to this questionnaire. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Irene Koffer. I'm from Belgium. I would have a comment. I feel uncomfortable when I hear about marriage, because 40 years ago I was a feminist activist and we were fighting against marriage. So 40 years later, I think it's really a problem to begin to find for marriage. It's the same marriage, and we speak. Some of you were speaking about the links between lesbians and the feminist movement. So for me, there is a contradiction, and I would ask: are we so proud about this world like it is with the heterosexual family, that we would like to be like them? And my question is, equality, okay, but with what? Thank you.
From the colleague there, which of course I anticipated. And actually what I should have said before starting to present the survey is to thank our friends from ILGA Europe, because they were extremely helpful in making publicity for the survey. We are an independent agency, so we haven't done this together with ILGA as such. It's our survey, it's our findings, and it's our responsibility. However, when you do rely on an internet questionnaire, and that we were strongly advised by experts in this area, that it will be the only way possible to reach out to people who also an anonymous questionnaire. You weren't obliged to put in your name. And we were strongly advised to do this as being the only way to reach out to groups who otherwise would never be willing to say anything about their sexual identity. ILGA was extremely helpful in assisting us with, let's say, the terms of references and in reaching out to different communities. Now, after a month, when we saw, when we got in the initial results of the surveys and we saw that lesbian respondents were underrepresented, or that we had nothing from Croatia, I think, or nothing for this or that country, there were additional efforts undertaken by ILGA and maybe other partners as well. And of course, it's helpful that ILGA has national sections where to work, particularly to encourage, again, members of a specific community, of one of the 5, or in a specific country, in order to get what we ultimately, from a, let's say, sociological point of view, we were happy with, which is enough respondents to make it a very credible survey for all 5 groups and all countries sufficiently represented. Of course, we would have wanted and we would have liked even more, particular from lesbian and bisexual women. And so I think we were aware. We have tried to address that halfway through. And I have to say this was the result which we got. What we will want to do is to repeat such a survey in 5 years from now, because that's important, so we can inform politicians such as yourself about what the trends in Europe are. We cannot do it next year, that's too early, but every 5 years we want to do a repeat survey of surveys we have undertaken in regard to certain groups. Of course, by then we hope we will have been able to reach out to more lesbians.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to add some comments, if you don't mind. I'm quite surprised to see again a survey which didn't take into account the racism. I mean the racism, because we know that in LGBT community in Europe, and within the growth, of right wing in Europe, or right wing, in Europe, that they are gay Muslims, lesbian Muslims, that they are of color gay, lesbian of color, transgender of color, and the survey is just based. Don't get me wrong, but it's just a question, It's but I saw that this survey focused only on gender, but why we don't? I mean, why you could, I mean, make an effort to interlink, because within the LGBT community, they are not only European origin people; they are also another origin, and these people, who are lesbian or gay or transgender of color, are suffering plus of the discrimination based on the sexual orientation or the identity orientations, are suffering also of racism and discrimination based on the race. So I wanted to if
very shortly, because I'm not sure if I get the question right, because of course these people were also authorized and even encouraged to take part in the survey. So this is not a survey. The 93,000 people are not necessarily only European Union nationals. They are people living in the 28 European Union member states, including third country nationals. So anyhow, the survey as such doesn't exclude the group of people you refer to.
Of course. I understand this. Sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
I understand. Because I saw 4 or 3 focus, something like healthcare, discrimination on blah 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 blah, and nothing linked to racism. It's very important, and I'm sorry if I bother this discussion, but it's very, as an activist,
Yeah. Now, really, my last one, because my fantastic colleague Sarah, of course, gives a quite solid answer, which is actually that we have a question where indeed respondents could indicate that they felt personally discriminated against or harassed on other grounds in a 12 months before the survey, including gender, age, religion or belief, ethnic origin, and disability. Respondents often said that they felt discriminated against or harassed on more than one ground. That's why Sarah is here. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to make two comments or answer. One is that you're totally right about what can you do. I mean, the most important thing is in that sense that's to see that we don't get a parliament who is based on homophobic people, anti-women people, xenophobia. And the only way to ensure that is that you vote on people who are not take part in that. And especially if you think that a lot of things are going wrong in European Union, and I'm one of them, definitely, then you shouldn't say, oh, I don't give a shit about this, I don't go to vote. That's exactly why you should go and vote anyway. Because if you want to change anything, if you want another Europe, you have to vote differently and according to the people who are sitting down here. So I will definitely say that these are important, because I'm also very afraid that if I get opportunity to be here next term, I'm going to be with plenty of these people that don't respect any human rights at all. But the only thing that can change that is that people vote on different persons. The secondly is more philosophic question you raised about marriage. I do understand your point, definitely. And
it's an old discussion.
Yeah, exactly. But and for me, it's easy in one way, because even if you don't want to marry or you want to marry, you should never ever be discriminated. That's the easy way for me out. Of course, you could always discuss what the institute of marriage really are, not there. But I mean, if you have an institute of marriage, at least the people who want to be part of that institute should not be discriminated, no matter what the sex or gender or whatever you have. So in that sense, I think it's easy. But the other question is much more bigger, more philosophic.
Well, also just a small comment on the question about the marriage. Well, coming from a lesbian and feminist organization, a very old feminist organization, I have to say we had many discussions like that. But I think it is important to understand what kind of things are happening. For example, in my country, in Croatia, now that we have a referendum on the definition of marriage, this has been used to really talk about gay people as a threat to family, to society, to children, in general, you know, to a threat to society. It places us at the level of second-class citizens. We are voting, are we going to be called people? Are our families going to be called families or not? If we are not in family law, we are in some separate law. We are having some separate institutions. We are threat to majority. This is how we are portrayed. And we are fighting now against that. We are not fighting for marriage as marriage in general. We're just fighting for equality, to be called people. I mean, this is really what is, I think this is kind of the point of that. And while it is like that, we will fight for marriage, but then we can fight for abolition of marriage.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Karima Zahir. I'm from the European Women's Lobby, which was mentioned a couple of times. I'd like to give you the opportunity to hear what we do exactly, and I know that Jana has mentioned about, Sanja, sorry, has mentioned about the cooperation in relation to the Convention on Violence Against Women. We support, of course, this initiative from GUE, and certainly it is important for the European Women's Lobby to increase the visibility of women and of lesbian women, and of their rights. And when I say lesbians, of course, I mean also bisexual women and trans lesbians. So we The European Women's Lobby has been pretty vigilant to include the specific situation of lesbians in all its advocacy work, whether we're talking about violence against women, sexual, reproductive and health rights, and so on. In relation to partnerships, of course, we share a lot in common with the LGBT organizations, namely, in this instance, at European level, ILGA Europe. But on other issues, we have a very much, obviously, feminist perspective, which doesn't always go along the line of that. And of course, Sabrina, I'd like to say that it's, you're very welcome to join in your own space, of course, and to keep that space, because when we talk also about lesbians, we also work around the rights of women from ethnic minority and migrant background. So in particular, we've been regularly drawing attention on the specific forms of violence that lesbians can face amongst all other forms of male violence than any woman might face just because she is a woman. Lesbian and bisexual women face targeted sexual harassment and abuse and may often receive an inappropriate response from authorities. Transgender women are particularly vulnerable to violence, especially in the public space and in street prostitution. The European Women's Lobby is concerned by acts of violence targeting specifically people who deviate from what is considered appropriate behavior on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And in this respect, we have a position paper on violence against women which specifically mentions lesbian women. So the European Women's Lobby has concrete demands when it comes to the sexual and reproductive health and rights of lesbian women. They should have the right to have children by artificial insemination or adoption. For EWL, methods of medically assisted reproduction should be available for all women, including lesbians and single women. Lesbians should also get access to information about sexuality, contraception and all health care services, including maternal care. For the European Women's Lobby, the struggle for lesbian rights is intrinsic to our struggle for women's rights, and we need to be vigilant about some demands of some LGBT groups, which are going against women's dignity and rights. This is the case of the call for the legalization of surrogacy. The European Women's Lobby strongly supports lesbians' demands to have access to assisted reproduction, but opposes any attempt to legalize surrogacy, as it would constitute a commodification of women's body and of children. Similarly, the European Women's Lobby strongly opposes any policy that would normalize prostitution, as we strongly believe that the system of prostitution perpetuates gender inequalities. Lesbians should be particularly alerted on this, as the system of prostitution conveys strong homophobic values by conveying very traditional views of the relationship between women and men, and even between gay men themselves. Finally, the European Women's Lobby hopes that lesbian movements will keep a strong feminist perspective on all issues to ensure that our common demands are based on a sense of solidarity, and that not one woman is left behind, as Sabrina mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Okay. This was the first panel, and I think we can finish this panel. And I thank you all the discussion and you. And yes, we can start with the second part. And the second part is very, very concrete. It's a part of the situation of lesbian people, lesbians in Russia, in Hungary, in Germany and in France. And I think we should start with these panels. And first, I give the floor Maria Kozlovskaya from Russia. And I have to say I'm very, very happy that you are here. Because of the new and not very well situation of LGBT people in Russia, and we are very happy to welcome you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really happy to be here as well. So my name is Maria Kozlovskaya. I'm from Russian LGBT Network. It's only one organization who working on a national level in Russia, and the biggest one. And I will try to tell you like a situation with the lesbians' rights in Russia and with the situation of the lesbian in Russia. So if we speak about lesbian rights, we should actually look on a general situation with LGBT rights in Russia right now. So of course everyone knows that we have anti-propaganda laws in different regions right now and on a national level. Of course, it affects everyday life of LGBT people and lesbians and bisexual women and transgender persons. And in August, we did like a small research by our organization, and I want to share a few results with you. It's just the numbers that you can just look at. We found that 11% of women who are lesbian or bisexual or transgender faced physical violence during the last year in Russia. And 52% faced verbal attacks during the last year. And 7% had the problems in the medical sphere, and 5% with parental rights. And during previous presentation, I tried to compare these results with it, and I tried to figure out why some numbers from our research are less than in Europe. And understand that most of the women in Russia in our research actually still in the closet, as well as all over Russia. So less than 40% of women actually answered that they are open with some group of people, like friends or family members or colleagues or even individuals, and just 1% of them said that they are absolutely open. And actually, I'm a lawyer, and as a lawyer working in LGBT organization, I receive a lot of requests from a different sphere of rights or something like that. And I do receive from 3 to 5 requests a month from a woman who had a previous heterosexual marriage and who have kids and now living in the same-sex like relationships or families. They actually request for help because ex-husbands or relatives, mothers even, or fathers are trying to take away their kids by the course, for example, and in the course they start to talk to the court that kids should live with a husband or with relatives because these women do propaganda to the kid every day and or have like immoral way of life because now she's lesbian. And sometimes we faced in our situation when ex-husband or relatives just take a kid for a walk and then hide them from mothers, and actually social services, like official governmental social services, are playing on the side of ex-husbands or relatives. And just a few months ago, we had a bill in the Russian State Duma on taking away parental rights from people who allow non-traditional sexual relations. So it can be applied to the LGBT people raising kids, single or same-sex families, and in most cases, of course, it's about lesbians or bisexual women, because in Russia right now just a few gay men have kids or raise them in same-sex families, and they are mostly lesbians or bisexual women. So right now this bill has been drafted by the initiator, but he stated to media that it's just to change some legal terms in the bill. So we expected it to come back soon in the Duma, and we think it will be before or just after Olympics Games in Russia. As an effect on lesbian families who have kids or want to have them in the future, most of them actually said that we want to leave a country as soon as possible, or before this bill can be adopted in Russia. So I think it's a small presentation because actually organizers asked me to do a really small, like a 5-minute presentation, so it's all. Thanks.
Yes, I also welcome our member of the European Parliament, and not only of the European Parliament, our member in the FEM committee, Ines Zuber. Ines Zuber, welcome. That you are here is wonderful for us, and I hope you will also discuss together with us. And yes, welcome. Fine that you are here. Let's start the lesbians in Hungary.
So I think we could go to the first slide. Maybe? Yeah. I'm sure you have heard about legal changes in Hungary because it's all over the news in the European Union. We are having a lot of anti-democratic laws introduced in the past few years, and it also affects. It also affects LGBT people. For example, the latest amendments of the Constitution, which happen regularly, like this was the 4th amendment of the Constitution since 2010. They defined marriage as the union of man and woman, which I don't need to explain what it means, and also the concept of family as married partners or kids with parents. And the same definition went to the family law, and a new thing was that child adoption is only allowed for people in marriage. So actually, straight people who live in non-registered partnership also are disadvantaged by this. Next one, please. For Hungarian LGBT people, registered partnership is available. There are 3 differences compared to marriage. One is that the couple cannot adopt children together. The women cannot go through artificial insemination as in a registered partnership. So those lesbians who want to have children with their partner, first they have to official insemination in either legal or illegal ways, and then get into the registered partnership. And they cannot take each other's name. That's the 3rd difference. Artificial insemination is regulated. It's available for single women if they are over 40, or if they can show medical proof that they can't get pregnant otherwise. So this limits lesbians' possibilities of artificial insemination. So there is a lot of practice, because there has been a kind of baby boom in the
past 5 years among women of like around age 30-40 lesbians, and so they try all sorts of methods. Of course, there are also private clinics, and then you can try it at home, you know. Yeah, but these are the official possibilities. About hate crime legislation, the criminal code was changed this year, sorry. And after a lot of criticism, they included sexual orientation and gender identity in the list of on what basis hate crime would be punished. But in the civil code, where hate speech legislation is regulated, sexual orientation and gender identity is not included. And it's also a new thing that prosecution can be started only if the victim is identifiable, so the law cannot be applied for groups. So, for example, if there's a group of LGBT people attacked after they are going home from the gay pride, then they have very limited, and they want to start a court case together. They have very limited possibilities. Next one. In education, the national core curriculum, which lists what kind of subjects should be taught in school, what content, what methods, what skills should be achieved. It's been constantly revised since 1995, and in the latest one, it's a step back from previous curricula. Sexual orientation, gender identity, the topic of LGBT people is not mentioned at all. And then there are special curricula for school subjects which were being changed last year, this year. There are like incredible sentences. I was really shocked. I was analyzing a couple of curricula, like some of them contain really like eugenicistic sentences about how students should be supported to have a gender identity in accordance with their genetic sex. That's one of my favorite sentences. So it's really problematic. Gender representation is very traditional, very heteronormative, very stereotypical, and there is a total silence on specific issues affecting LGBT children and youth, such as school bullying and so on. Next one, please. Violence against lesbian. Homophobic violence. There's a problem. Data is not really available. I was very happy to hear that we are going to have fresh data soon, European level, including Hungary. There was a national survey in 2010 where there is data about violence, but it's not disaggregated, so we don't know about data about lesbians. We can guess that it's severely underreported. It's a complete taboo. We have lots of anecdotal evidence, of course. We know that that school bullying affects gay boys more than lesbian girls, and in the violent attacks around the Pride, it's mostly men, but not only men, who are targeted with physical violence and verbal. And then violence among lesbians, that's like completely, we don't know anything about that. It's very much a taboo. Women don't talk about it except in very informal circumstances, and then there are lots of sexist views among lesbians as well, like women are also aggressive, and that they take certain kinds of aggression natural or feminine. So this is something that we really have to work more about. Next one, please. As for advocacy, we don't really have any specific organization for advocacy for lesbian women. In the last slide or two, I will tell you about my organization. We don't do advocacy activities, but this is kind of divided among LGBT NGOs plus some other NGOs that are not LGBT, but they represent cases of homophobic discrimination, like the Helsinki Committee, the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, and the Equal Treatment Authority. And then there is advocacy, legal support, political lobbying done by Háttér Society, which is the biggest mixed LGBT NGO, and also the Hungarian LGBT Alliance, which is an umbrella organization, and Labrisz is also a member of that. We don't know much about the economic situation of lesbians either. What we notice is that there are much less lesbians than gays at mixed community events, like during the Pride Festival, for example, where there is an entrance fee. It's really outstanding. We are surprised all the time. Like, is there really such a big difference in income, or what can explain that? And then there are flourishing gay businesses, like entertaining businesses, but the only lesbian bar that existed was a couple of years ago, and it existed for about a year, and then it closed up because there weren't enough customers to sustain the place financially. So there is obviously some economic difference, but we don't know so much about it. Next one, please. In the media, I suppose that's very common in all countries. There is a growing media presence in recent years, but the representations are very stereotypical, very mainstream, and very often pornographic, which only speak to straight male ideas about being lesbian and their fantasies. Thank you. Next. And then lesbian situation in the women's movement. Hungarian women's movement is quite small and quite small. And the majority of organizations are following a kind of mainstream neoliberal ideology and agenda. And there have always been lesbians in the women's movement, even when it was very hard and they were not supported to be out. Nowadays there is a growing inclusion, even though even recently something happened. Perhaps I will talk about it later, which was an attempt to exclude lesbians from a national women's movement event, but we negotiated that, so that got resolved. There are still many heteronormative approaches in the women's movement. Labrisz is a member of the Hungarian women's lobby, so well, that's our kind of most like mainstream feminist affiliation. We are kind of between mainstream and radical or more separatist, or it's not a good word, but yeah, this next one. And in the LGBT movement, Labrisz is quite well established in the movement and visible, but still I would say that the movement is still male biased and gay centered, and Labrisz is the only feminist and lesbian organization with only women membership, and all the other NGOs are mixed, but usually with male majority and leadership. But there's a good cooperation among us, nevertheless, with certain NGOs on certain issues and projects. We work together quite a lot, and we are also a member of the Hungarian LGBT Alliance, which is also an umbrella organization. And now about Labrisz. We were founded in 1999. We define ourselves as a feminist organization, and we are still the only lesbian NGO, unfortunately. We do voluntary work besides work and studying, mostly. We don't have paid staff. Usually we have 10-15 members and about 20-30 volunteers. And we are mostly funded by international funders, and we get very little state money and less. And in the past 3 years since the right-wing government came to power, our state funding visibly decreased, and I don't think there is no connection between, you know, so I think it's probably politically based. And finally, quickly about our activities. We do all this despite what I said before. We have a festival, a cultural festival called LIFT, Lesbian Identity Festival. We've been doing that since 2005, once a year. We have a Lesbian Her Story project where we collect all the lesbians' life stories, and we have made a film, a book about the interviews, and now we are translating the interviews into English because we want to make an online archive. And we are still collecting interviews. We have a school program with Symposium, that's another NGO. We participate in the Pride Festival, the organization of the Pride Festival. We have published 5 books so far. We are making films. We do regular community building and entertaining programs. We have monthly film club, game club, discussion evenings, parties. We provide information in various channels, and when individual lesbians contact us for asking for advice or legal help, then we try to give them counseling. So thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think the situation is very, very complicated for the women, and we should discuss about this after the other contributions. Also about Russia and what can we do, how can we support you, what can we do for more common activities in Europe. I think it's a very, very important issue, and issue with many power as possible. Yes, but before we will speak what is the situation in Germany, and I give the floor Vera Vordenbäumen.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe ja die.
Thank you very much. I have the great luxury to be able to speak my own language here, and I'm going to make use of that. So when we look at the life realities of lesbians in Germany, I'd like to look at 2 different elements. One, the legal aspect, so the legal equality of lesbians in Germany, and the second part of my presentation will be focusing on social recognition of lesbian identity and ways of life. So I would like to examine the question as to whether lesbians can truly live in Germany without being discriminated against. But first of all, equal rights. The German Constitution and the German Basic Law, named specifically paragraph 3, says that all men and women are equal before the law, that the state will help to promote equality and to eliminate discrimination. And I'm afraid I just made a big mess with all my papers here. The third paragraph of the article reads that no one is allowed to be discriminated against because of his or her language, origin, belief, religion, sexual identity, sexual orientation. Nobody is allowed to be discriminated against because of disabilities. So the equality of men and women in the basic law, so the Constitution, and this additional paragraph on disabilities was added to the Constitution in 1994. But what is quite obvious, that even in the basic right, there is a strong focus on heterosexuality, so men and women are equal, but LGBT people are not mentioned. In 2009, the LGBT Association in Germany launched an initiative called the Initiative Article 3+, which requested that the basic law, so the Constitution, be expanded to include that to the paragraph I just mentioned, which says that no one is allowed to be discriminated against. The LSVD and many other very prominent politicians and people in public life, the Social Democrats and the Greens and other parties, have requested the Constitution to be changed, but a two-thirds majority is needed in the German Parliament to agree to such a change in the Constitution. And the largest party, the CDU-CSU, has rejected the change in Constitution so far, so it has not yet been achieved. Although there were no rules in Germany nowadays that discriminate, or rather that penalize homosexuality, there is still discrimination within family law. The discussion surrounding the gay marriage has said in family law that since 2001 it has been possible for partnership, a same-sex partnership, to be undertaken by same-sex couples. Sexual orientation of the person doesn't necessarily matter. Partnerships, or registered partnerships in Germany, is the only possibility that same-sex couples have to be given a legal acceptance. The legal consequences of such partnerships are mostly the same as the legal consequences of marriage. For people of opposite sexes, marriage is still the only form of officially recognized partnership. Until 2013, so this year, there was still a difference in terms of income law, a difference between the partnership, the registered partnership, and the marriage. It had not yet been included in certain laws pertaining to income and taxation. However, this year, the German Constitutional Court said that this was a form of discrimination and that the laws would have to be changed, and the German government has put in place the necessary steps. Along the same lines, in 2010, the Constitutional Court ruled that in heritage law, the registered partnership and marriage has to be equal. This also includes many other forms of financial help from the state, so for children and unemployment and pension, etc. The registered partnership is equal to marriage. If a partner dies, the still living partner can receive a pension, and in that sense, the registered partnership is equal to marriage. In 2011, the European Court of Justice ruled that a same-sex couple has to have the same pension rights as men and women who are married. The Court of Justice in Luxembourg furthermore stated that in terms of paying into the pension funds, the official partnership, the registered partnership, also has to be equal to marriage. And this was carried out and put into law, which means that the survivor now also has the right to a pension. There are many other ways in which the registered partnership was made equal to marriage, specifically in terms of lifting it. In order to lift such a partnership, the same rules have to apply as for divorce. So the partners have to have lived apart for a certain amount of time, and they have to agree that they will divorce, and an alimony has to be paid in some cases. So in terms of law, it is not identical to marriage, but there are hardly any areas in which it is not treated as equal. There are, however, still some. And for many lesbians, specifically, family law is very important here. Two lesbians living in Germany cannot adopt a child. However, it is possible to adopt the child of your partner, and successive second adoption is also possible. So, meaning if one partner had already adopted a child, the second partner can then subsequently adopt the same child, and the child can then live together with the same-sex couple. In 2003, the European Court, the German Constitutional Court, made another very positive ruling, because it stated that the partner which lives in equality of homosexual women in Germany is certainly worthy of taking a separate look at. The employment law, which both the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Lutheran Evangelical Church enjoy a specific status in Germany when it comes to employment laws. Employees within these church institutions have very different rights to other employees within Germany, because the churches, according to the constitution, can decide on their own employment rules. This dates back to the Weimar Republic, and after the Second World War, it was included into the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Germany. And the basis for this was the division between state and church, which I find to be right, but it then also legitimizes a legal status of the church, which is completely separate to the rest of Germany in the area of employment rules. This paragraph in the German constitution states that the German churches can expect their employees to adhere to their worldview, and if employees do not remain loyal to this worldview and do not adhere to it, then they can be fired. The two largest Christian churches in Germany, specifically in rural areas, they are part of the care economy. So they are part of, they run everything from kindergartens to schools to daycare to elderly care to many other institutions, even hospitals. There are increasing numbers of church-run institutions in Eastern Germany, and most people working in the care economy are women. And so anyone who wants to work as a social worker, as a doctor, as a nurse, as a teacher within these church-run institutions cannot openly live her homosexuality, because in spite of the European anti-discrimination law, the Church has a separate employment law within Germany, so they have to adhere to the moral views of the Church, and if they do not, they can lose their jobs. In my view, this employment rule is in no way compatible with a modern form of employment law in a country such as Germany, and it should be changed. Another important point for me is when it comes to the wish to have children among lesbians. There is a rule permitting artificial insemination of lesbian women in Germany. However, the Bundesärztekammer, which is the National Association of German Doctors, agreed on a directive saying that the child has to have a stable relationship with both parents, which is why artificial insemination of women who are not in a partnership or who are in a same-sex partnership should be excluded. And 14 out of 16 members of this association accepted this directive, and so in 14 of the 16 regions it is now applied. And if doctors go against this directive, they can lose their license. And it has been said that there are still many open questions, specifically as to the definition of mother and father, the rights of children, and the liability of doctors. And if the family rights and the rights of the children are not clearly defined, then it leads to many moral questions. Many lesbian couples who do want to have children see that the medical association is very conventional and traditional, but they do understand that the main reason for this law is probably financial, and the financial liability that the doctor could be called into. In terms of social acceptance of a lesbian lifestyle in Germany, I would say that in large cities it is generally accepted to live as a lesbian woman. However, we're of course still very far from a world free of discrimination. Okay, I'll be short here because the study that we just had presented to us already gave us a lot of information also relating to lesbians from Germany, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. But there is one point that I would like to make that I find very important. In terms of a change in order to live free of discrimination, I do think it is important that there be a proactive approach in schooling, so that young women and girls can already, even when they are still in school, live out their sexuality freely. There are some very good project examples in some schools in regions in Germany that are very well accepted by the children, but these few projects are few and far between. The second aspect also has to do with young people. In my mind, there are far too few open lesbians. There are many famous gay men, be they artists or moderators, people with a public image who act as role models. And I think in the last 10 years it has really increased. But when it comes to lesbians, that is still lacking. And I think that would be perhaps a possible way of approaching more strength through unity and to perhaps move forward in that direction as well. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Liebe Vera, thank you very much.
Schönen Dank. Ja, da gibt es viel zu tun, auch in Deutschland. Nicht nur in den anderen Ländern, auch in Deutschland. Und es ist wichtig, dass wir dort auch den Fortschritt vorantreiben können, mehr Bewegung reinbringen können für die Frauen, auch in anderen Ländern. Schönen Dank. Die letzte Rednerin ist Marie-Josèphe de Villers. Bitte. Einen schönen Abend. Ich bin Marie-Josèphe de Villers. Ich komme von der lesbischen Koordinierung Frankreich. Wir koordinieren verschiedene lesbische Organisationen auf nationaler Ebene. Wir sind verbunden mit etwa 2000 Lesben. Im Jahre 1997 ist unsere Vereinigung gegründet worden, um eben Lesben, Feministinnen und Frauen im Allgemeinen zusammenzubringen im Kampf gegen den Hass der Lesben, für die Sichtbarkeit unserer Rechte, Gleichstellung in einer säkulären Gesellschaft der Solidarität. CLF nennen wir uns, also Koordination der Lesben von Frankreich. Wir sind feministisch und für die Abschaffung der Prostitution. Nun, wie sieht die Lage in Frankreich für uns aus? Erstens gibt es radikale rechte Bewegungen, die immer mehr Stimmen erhalten. Ihre Vorstellungen verbreiten sich immer schneller und sickern durch in die ganze Gesellschaft und führen zu Rassismus.
Hatred, homosexuality, homophobia and lesbophobia. And a socialist government, the gays and lesbians have recently been granted to access to same-sex marriage and adoption. The social and economical situation is far from being bright, affecting lesbians as it affects women. In this context, what do we think most important from the point of view of our organization? 4 points. The first is the struggle against lesbophobia. We are very keen on using the word lesbophobia instead of homophobia, because we think that homophobia doesn't at all account for lesbophobia. Discrimination against gays and discrimination against lesbians doesn't proceed the same way. For example, boys as young as 10 are expected to grow and develop amongst their friends, mostly outdoors, where virility, manhood, is the common law. Often, attempt to escape the pregnant virility model is punished with violence. Girls have less access to the outside world, as they are more often kept within the family circle, where the pressure is very strong to follow heterosexual gender roles. In some countries, forced marriage and even rape, corrective rape as we call it usually, is the punishment for such behavior, and it's the reason why violence against gay is visible, as violence against lesbian is less visible. Of course, we have a law against homophobia, but lesbians are still facing lesbophobia in the society and at work. Furthermore, lesbophobia is there within our institutions, based on stereotypes on lesbian. For example, lesbian asylum seekers have seen recently, they have seen their claim for refugee status based on sexual orientation turned down. having children or having been married, they were disqualified as lesbians and thus denied the right to ask for asylum, which is a real discrimination case from the part of the institution. And they had been married, usually as a forced marriage, of course. Second point, struggle for individual rights. Same-sex marriage, presented as a step towards equal rights, is in fact limited to equalizing the situation between homosexual couples and straight couples. Marriage and all the official marital arrangements offers advantages like reduced inheritance taxes, transfer of the flat to the survivor of a couple, social coverage, and survivors' pensions. They are derived rights, and they are not individual rights. These measures, resulting from family policy from another age, introduce inequality between single people and coupled people, while society repeatedly calls upon our responsibility as citizens, and while autonomy is a feminist demand, our social and fiscal system sees us only as part of a family or of a couple. Joint income tax, for example, sending the individual to dependence. And for those of us who are for an egalitarian, secular society with a sense of solidarity, for whom autonomy is the key to real freedom, there is nothing. That's why we have to rethink the entire functioning of our society on the fiscal and social level, studying other solutions, such as the Danish system. The Danish system puts the individual as the unit of the society and not the family, or the other solution as the unconditional basic income. Third point, struggle in the name of equality against the prostitution system and the legalization of surrogacy. Our relationship to the gay movement in the 70s proceeded more from our common stance in contesting heterosexual and heteropatriarchal norms than from our situation as a discriminated against minority. Now, today, in the post-marriage period, what do we still have in common? In many areas, we find ourselves on opposing sides of the battlefield, the issue of surrogate motherhood being the most convincing indicator. We are against the system of exploiting women through surrogacy. For the same reason, we are for the abolition of the prostitution system. Working with the LGBT organization, we came up against what one of us described as homo-patriarchy, with their demand of surrogacy as a right and their often violent contestation of any proposal against the prostitution system. This situation leads us to question our alliances. Fortunately, our positions are shared by the gay and lesbian organization, by gays who come from the political left or far left, and of course by feminists, that is to say by organization on the side of equality. Last point, battle against criminalization of lesbianism and homosexuality, worldwide decriminalization of lesbianism and homosexuality is a life and death issue for thousands of lesbians in the world. In this context, lesbian solidarity is vital. Concretely, it means supporting lesbian refugees in our countries, which is becoming an important commitment for the lesbian movement, for the lesbian movement in France. We must also build links with lesbian organizations trying to get established in countries where homosexuality is still criminalized. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think perspective. There's a lot of problems, and we have to speak about the stereotypes. And about the solidarity, the necessity of solidarity, and yes, I open the floor for discussion, for question, for comments, for whatever, for recommendations, what we have to do. Please, who wants the first?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add some comments about the terms of lesbophobia, because it's very important and fundamental also to use these terms even within the feminist and lesbian European NGOs, because apart Marie-Josèphe and I, nobody used the term of lesbophobia, and this is very important because this means that we need to visibilize a specific and a double specific violence against women. And I will not add what Marie-Josèphe, my fantastic comrade, of course, as usual, said about this. Because it's when I talked, about the strategic temporary alliances in France, Marie-Josèphe is one of, Marie-Josèphe, the lesbian coordination in France. Concerning the point about asylum, lesbian asylum seeker, Marie-Josèphe talked about the difficulties they faced in front of the French authorities in terms of the French authorities can refuse the apply because of they've been married, or they've been they had children or something like this. It's very important, and I think it's you as a UP member do something. I think that the French authorities in political asylum issues particular, and in Europe in general, there is a fantastic lack of a gender approach, and this is it's very yeah. So I think so, and I remember when I worked at Amnesty International, we took, we led a campaign to insist on this gender basis, because women, lesbians, or women in general, and lesbians specifically, can't speak loudly and easily about violence, about rape, corrective rape, and forced abortion and something. So these are two comments, and thank you.
Thank you. If I may insist, what I heard about Germany and France, yes, it's really not the same about the rights linked to marriage. I heard that in Germany, the partnership, as you said, will become the same as marriage in terms of social rights. It's just the opposite of what France asks. The individual social rights. I think it's really very important for all what is social, but not only. I think also that the asylum right is linked now to the marriage. It's easier to come to Europe if you marry a European, a Belgian, or a French man or woman citizen, indeed, and also in the asylum right, it would be important to ask that it would be an individual issue and not linked to the fact that you are in love with somebody else. Is it lesbian or gay or heterosexual? I have a problem with this word. it wouldn't count. It's important that if you have problems in your country, you have problems as an individual. So it would be, Europe would be more open to everybody and not linked to marriage, but for example. So I'm nearer to the French position, of course. But you see that marriage is not only a symbolic issue; it has also material consequences, and we have to speak about it, and perhaps, if it's possible, to have a common position about it. Thank you.
Ich möchte mich bedanken, dass ich hier bin als Außereuropäische, weil ich ja zur Schweiz gehöre und die Schweiz gehört da irgendwo im Nebel vom Europa. Aber wir brauchen natürlich sehr, sehr stark alles, was in Europa geschieht. Wir schauen auch immer, was so passiert. Wir haben jetzt auch ganz klar verfolgt, was in Frankreich kam, über die
France. We keep an eye on what's been going on in France. We keep an eye on the situation in other countries, in Germany. And so I'm from Switzerland, and we watch all other European countries very close. And at the moment in Switzerland, there is a Conservative Party in Switzerland that wants to introduce a definition of marriage into the Constitution. Currently, the Constitution does not contain such a definition, but they want to define it constitutionally as a union between man and woman. About 20 years ago, we had a partnership law in Switzerland, which was a step in the right direction. Now we've gone back again. So even though we're not a member of the European Union, we do keep a close eye on what's going on in other European countries and try to look at things that could perhaps help us as well. I'd like to say something else to lesbophobia. I'm actually French-speaking, and I work for the French-speaking organization in Switzerland, where I do have to speak German as well. I use the word lesbophobia in German because it's very well known in France and in French, but German people have told me it's not a good German word. I shouldn't be using it. So I'd actually quite like to ask maybe someone who is a German of mother tongue to tell me, does it exist? Is it a word or is it not a word?
Very short, I don't know.
Das weiß ich gar nicht, ich kenne das Wort nicht.
Ich denke, wir benutzen es nicht. Wir reden generell von Homophobie und insofern wird das Geschlecht zugedeckt. Leider.
Marie-Françoise Stewart. I'm here for several organizations. One of them was Culture and Media. Several of the I live in Belgium. I'm French. Several of the speakers have mentioned what I call the pornography, meaning the image of the lesbian couple as being used as pornography. And unless I'm wrong, but European Union has media programs. It has some power on what we show in televisions or in films, and it does give money for making films. And of course I wouldn't advise censorship, but I think that organizations like the lobby, European Lobby of Women, and what they are fighting against, prostitution and particularly what I call pornography, could find maybe an echo or maybe some measures, or maybe we could see a bit of progress on that level. Thank you.
Thank you.
sorry, I have no answer to your question. I would like to give you an answer. My name is Regina. I'm coming from Germany, from the German only lesbian organization Lesbenring, and now I would like to answer in German because it is this typical German language problem. Du hast gefragt, ob es den Begriff Lesbiophobie gibt.
So you asked whether the word lesbophobie exists in German. So the German language makes a difference between male and female versions of words. And from a feminist point of view, we see language as also creating a certain type of awareness. So homo also includes both. It includes gays and lesbians. But we do use the word lesbian, lesbisch, as something that is different to homosexuality, because homosexuality is very much taken up by the gay movement. When we speak about homosexuality in Germany, often people only talk about gays. And I'm here with a question from my organization. I'm not sure if it's a question or perhaps more a cry for help. In our everyday work in the lesbian movement, we of course do also work with gays or other LGBT people. And that's part of the reason why we've managed to achieve so much, as the German speaker detailed. But at the moment, we just can't continue. We're exhausted. Because everywhere where we try to collaborate with the gay movement, we're the ones doing the work. The lesbians are the ones doing all the work. And perhaps that's something we can speak about a bit more later. But we're completely exhausted. How can we run this in the future? Is there something we should do? Should we, should we act on this? The tenders, all the public money goes to the gays. All the top positions go to the gays. And we, lesbians within the LGBT community, are completely invisible. And that's why we use the word lesbophobia, lesbophobie in German. We use it explicitly to make that difference.
Just a small comment.
Noch ein Kommentar dazu, gerade zur
being linked to marriage and so on. First of all, I would like to mention that in regards to asylum, asylum is treated as an individual right, while joining family is another institute which relates to families, same partners, married partners, and then possibly same-sex partners. And also, I would like to say that some of the rights that derive from marriage or cohabitation or registered partnerships are really linked to partners and are necessarily linked to couples. For example, in Croatia, we don't have a right to make decisions on emergency medical treatments for our partner if we are not perceived as a family. And this is, I think, one of the important points to be made, why some rights need to be regulated and why some rights need to derive from some sort of legislation, partnership, married, or whatever. Just a small.
I just wanted to add something about this word lesbophobia. This word lesbophobie in French, is still not in our official dictionary. And We created this word in 1999 because we wanted to make lesbian discrimination visible. And it took us, this time, it took us 10 years to make it accepted by everybody, at least nearly everybody. The media used it in 2007. And when the media used it, everybody used it after that. And at the beginning, we have got an organization called SOS Homophobia. And they usually, each year, they would make a research on homophobia. And when we started to use this word lesbophobia, and when we started to talk to them, the year after, they made this very interesting research study on lesbophobia. It means we've got to create our words, whether they are official or not. It's very important.
Yes, I have a question perhaps to you as parliamentarians. Is there do we have any Vergleich, compare of the rights of lesbian in Europe? I mean, this was a first debate between us as women sitting here for some hours, but I would be very interested in an official document about the rights and of lesbian in Europe.
Especially lesbian.
Do you mean like a document from the European Parliament? Do you mean overall in European institutions or something?
Directives?
No, because there is no one in that sense. And as I said, not even my committee has produced a report or... Yeah, exactly. Because there is always a fight about which kind of reports we are going to write, because you're only allowed to have a certain amount of reports in the system at the same time. So we also always negotiate with the political parties. The closest, as I said, is this resolution about lesbian rights in Africa. That was a resolution adopted. Unfortunately, it was not in European Union. That's a problem, but at least it recognized the problem in that sense. And the second one was, as I mentioned, at least in this sexual and reproductive health and rights report, there you have a lot of things connecting to lesbians' rights, definitely, no doubt about it. So I think that would be the report document will be closest at what you want, but there is no other directive or anything like and no report that highlights lesbian rights in that sense. No, that's true.
Okay. Okay. I cannot see other comments. Und ja, dann will ich zum Ende kommen und benutze noch einmal meine Muttersprache und möchte.
In that case, I'd like to make a few closing remarks in my mother tongue and perhaps dare to make a few statements. I think firstly we have to distinguish. We have to distinguish within homosexuality how many people are affected by it, or how many people are affected by sexual orientation who don't conform to this typically traditional view of, mother, father, and children, this traditional view of marriage. And this, it's important to differentiate between the different groups in order to be able to assess the life situations more specifically. And I think that lesbian couples really are still in the grey zone or even the dark zone of statistics and facts, and we know nothing about their situation. The same for homophobia. I think that there's a real gap here, a large gap in our view of things, because primarily it's about gays. It's about gays who are in the focus of the media and in the main focus of politics as well. So I think it's something that we still have a lot of catching up to do with, and organizations, initiatives like you are gathered here today can really provide us politicians with those facts that we need. You can put the things that we need on the table in order to allow us to act, not just because we want to act, but also because within this parliament there are many other people with opposite positions whom we have to negotiate with and whom we have to have a dialogue with if we want to move anything forward. I think the second thing I want to mention is networks. Networks of solidarity and actions, activities in order to reach a wide public. I think that's a really crucial topic. And if we can manage that, if we can manage to construct this network nationally and at a European level, I think we might be able to move forward. I don't see any other paths. No one's going to do it for us. The lobby isn't going to do it for us. You know, we are the lobby, so we have to organize, and it's very difficult. I myself see it. I'm a member of various associations and organizations, and I just see that there's just not enough energy for all the different things you want to do, because you're so committed in so many different causes and no one's doing the work for you. So I think networking is absolutely vital, and perhaps such a workshop is also something that can contribute to such a network, to see what it's like in other places and to get some new ideas. This talk about lesbophobia, for instance, the word was sort of very interesting for me, and also how things are done in different countries. And so when it comes to marriage, I can't leave the topic alone. I don't care what it's called. I really just don't mind what the name is you give it. But the main point is that no way of life is allowed to be less valid than another. In Germany, we have the so-called splitting between married partners, which is a fiscal advantage in tax law. So it's a tax advantage for marriages, and no one knows why we have it. No one can even explain it. Perhaps 20, 30 years ago people could still explain it, but no one can explain it anymore. No one can justify it. So no matter what you call it, marriage, registered partnership, lifelong partnership, whatever, the fact that one form of living enjoys more rights than another is not acceptable. In Germany, it's impossible to get rid of this new tax law. And because it was impossible to abolish it, we said, well, then at least with registered partnerships, we want to have the same level of rights as marriages, which isn't the solution, because in Germany, other forms of living suffer from it. Men and even men and women who just live together but who aren't married have nothing, because they can't have a registered partnership like same-sex partners. And if they don't want to get married, but they still want to live together, they still want to have children together, or they have children and their mothers themselves raising the children have so many difficulties and are discriminated against compared to marriage, and that's what's unacceptable. So different ways of living all have to enjoy the same rights, and as long as that's not the case, our battle is not won. I think that we in the European Parliament really need to address the topic directly. We really jumped in at the deep end today. I think we just went for it, and it's a first step, and we can't just leave it at this. We need to move on with it, and perhaps a report to the situation of lesbians in Europe is something that needs to happen. Other initiatives. But the ground needs to be laid for this. First steps need to be taken. And it's not easy in the European Parliament, just as in the national parliaments, I'm sure it's not easy. And I remember a discussion that I had in a regional parliament when I was a member of that parliament at the time. A conservative politician stood up and said that there was no such thing as homosexuals. That was really quite adventurous. I'm sure there were some in his own political group, but he stood up and he just said it. And several people, myself including, stood up and said, of course you can claim that the earth is flat. Of course you're allowed to claim that, but it's not true. It's not how the world is. The world is different. And it's a discussion that will continue to be present for many, many, many years, especially in this parliament, where there are more and more right-wing and conservative forces, even in today's parliament. And if people don't turn out to vote next year, and left parties, I'm not just talking about us, turn out to vote for the left parties, it'll just become worse, and that will have enormous consequences for Europe. I think that the Greens, but the Social Democrats and the Socialists can be possible partners, even the Liberals sometimes, for us, so we can't underestimate the necessary political partnerships. Partnerships and alliances are absolutely vital, and that is what we fight for, and I would like to ask you all to support us. It's important in order to achieve something. And perhaps the first thing we can achieve is to get the Estrela-Bericht adopted. That would be a first step, something that is vital for Europe, to make sure that modern thoughts and modern ways of viewing marriage, partnerships, registered partnerships, and all the different ways of living that exist can be defended by a majority of the European Parliament. If we can't find a majority here, then I don't know where we'll find one. And I'm far too European to think that we can deal with this on a national level. You know what it's like in many countries, in the Baltic states, in the West Balkans, other regions in Europe, where there are huge problems. So I think that was what I wanted to say. Those were my closing words. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so, so much for coming, for speaking, for sharing your thoughts, and for really getting the ball rolling. And because we're so pleased about this, I'd like to invite you all for a drink. And perhaps we can still have ongoing internal discussions and continue the debate. Thank you.